Weddings are supposed to be days of joy, of promises made and futures celebrated. I dressed in my best suit, polished the old shoes I hadn't worn in years, and sat proudly in the front row as my daughter prepared to marry again. At 59, I wasn't easily moved by ceremonies anymore, but seeing her walk down the aisle in white still tightened my chest with pride. Everything looked perfect, the flowers, the music, the careful smiles. But sometimes perfection hides the deepest fractures. And I saw it in my granddaughter's face. She was 13, still caught between childhood and adolescence, but sharp-eyed like her grandmother had been. My granddaughter, Lily, sat 2 seats away from me, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles blanched white. At first, I thought it was nerves, the awkwardness of watching her mother begin a new life with another man. But then I noticed the way her jaw worked, the way she kept glancing at the groom as though each look stung more than the last. When the vows began, she leaned closer to me, her voice a whisper that trembled. "Grandpa," Lily said, "I don't want to be here anymore. Can we leave?" The request shocked me. I leaned down, keeping my voice low. "Sweetheart, it's your mother's wedding. Why would you want to go?" Her eyes filled with tears, and in them I saw not childish drama, but fear. Real fear. She shook her head, unable to form the words, and that silence told me more than anything she could have said. I straightened in my chair, my stomach twisting. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. My granddaughter wasn't the kind to throw tantrums or seek attention. If she wanted to leave her mother's wedding, it was for a reason that cut deeper than nerves. I glanced at the groom, Mark, a man who had always seemed just a little too polished, a little too smooth in his compliments. A flicker of unease rippled through me. The ceremony continued around us, vows, rings, applause, but my mind was no longer on the words. It was on the trembling child beside me, on the secret she was holding back, and on the cold certainty that whatever truth she had discovered was about to shatter this perfect day. And when she finally whispered that truth to me, the wedding would never be remembered for love, it would be remembered for what came after. As the newlyweds turned to face the applause of the crowd, I leaned closer to my granddaughter. Her hands were shaking, her lips pressed so tightly together I could see the strain in her cheeks. "Sweetheart," I murmured, "tell me what's wrong." She blinked fast, fighting back tears. Then, in a voice so faint I had to bend close to hear it, she whispered, "I saw him. With someone else. Before the wedding. It wasn't Mom." The words hit me like a hammer to the chest. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice rougher than I intended. Her gaze darted toward the groom. "Last week, at the cafe near school. He was holding another woman's hand. He kissed her when he thought no one was looking. And when he saw me, he told me not to tell anyone. He said it would ruin everything." The room spun. Applause filled the hall, but to me, it sounded like mockery. My daughter stood there, smiling at her new husband, believing she was stepping into a new chapter of love, while the truth already poisoned the ink on the page. I clenched my fists in my lap, forcing myself to stay calm for my granddaughter's sake. "You did the right thing telling me," I whispered. "I'm proud of you." She nodded, but her lips quivered. "I don't want her to get hurt. I don't want to stay here and pretend." I looked at her, at the fear and honesty in her young eyes, and I knew she was telling the truth. She wasn't dramatic. She wasn't lying. She was carrying a secret that no child should ever bear. My chest burned with rage, not only at him, but at myself, for not seeing it sooner, for not protecting my daughter from another man who wore a mask. As the crowd rose to its feet, cheering for the kiss, my granddaughter grabbed my hand. Her grip was fierce, desperate. "Please, Grandpa. Can we go?" I glanced at the happy couple, then back at the trembling child beside me. A choice hung in the air: stay silent and preserve appearances, or walk out, and let the cracks show right there on her wedding day. And in that moment, I knew one thing with certainty: this secret would not stay buried. I stood, slowly, as if my bones ached more than usual. In truth, it wasn't my body but my heart that felt heavy. My granddaughter's small hand clung to mine, pulling gently, urging me toward the aisle. I could feel the eyes of other guests turning toward us, curious why the old man was leaving in the middle of applause. "Where are you going?" my daughter's voice carried faintly from the altar. She was still glowing, caught up in the moment, her hand threaded through her new husband's arm, Mark's arm. I forced a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "The little one isn't feeling well," I said, loud enough for those nearest to hear. "We'll step outside for some air." My granddaughter kept her head down, letting me guide her out. The music swelled behind us, the crowd clapping again as though nothing had happened. But for us, everything had changed. Once we reached the courtyard, she finally let go of my hand and exhaled like she'd been holding her breath the entire ceremony. "Thank you," she whispered. I crouched down to her level, ignoring the stiffness in my knees. "You're brave," I told her. "Don't you ever think you're not? What you saw, what you told me, it was the right thing." She nodded, though tears brimmed in her eyes. "Do you think Mom will believe me?" The question cut me deeper than the confession had. My daughter, swept away by love, blinded by the promise of a new beginning, would she hear her child's warning? Or would she dismiss it as jealousy, nerves, or worse, a lie? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked back at the tall wooden doors of the chapel. Inside, the music still played, laughter spilling out in bursts. A celebration of love, they thought. But for me, it already felt like the first day of betrayal. "We'll find the right moment to tell her," I said carefully. "For now, what matters is that you're safe, and you don't have to carry this secret alone anymore." She threw her arms around my neck, and I held her tight, my jaw clenched with fury at the man inside, the man who dared to make vows he had already broken. I knew then that this wedding wasn't an ending or a beginning. It was a fuse. And sooner or later, it was going to blow. The reception was held in a hall across town, a grand affair with chandeliers and linen-draped tables. I had no intention of staying long, but my granddaughter asked me not to leave her alone just yet. So we walked in together, my hand steady on her shoulder while my mind churned. Mark was everywhere, shaking hands, flashing his smile, raising a glass like a man born to charm a crowd. To most eyes, he looked flawless. But now that I knew the truth, every gesture felt calculated, every grin painted. He was an actor playing the role of a devoted husband, and the audience was eating it up. My daughter glowed beside him, her cheeks flushed with happiness. She looked radiant, yes, but she also looked blind. Blind to the whispers my granddaughter had shared, blind to the cracks forming under the glitter of her perfect day. At our table, relatives asked why we had slipped out during the ceremony. I kept my answer vague. "The little one needed some air," I said. They nodded, satisfied, but I caught a few curious glances cast in our direction. Midway through dinner, I excused myself and stepped outside for some air of my own. The weight of the secret pressed hard. Should I ruin her wedding day by revealing it now? Should I wait until the honeymoon glow faded, then show her the truth? As I stood there under the evening sky, the groom himself came out for a smoke. He startled when he saw me, then forced that same slick smile. "Everything all right, sir?" he asked, like butter wouldn't melt in his mouth. I studied him for a long moment. His tie loosened, his hair a little out of place, but his eyes carried the arrogance of a man convinced he could get away with anything. "Enjoying your big day?" I asked evenly. "The best day of my life," he said without hesitation. "Your daughter's an incredible woman. I'll take care of her." The words dripped with irony. My jaw tightened, but I forced myself to nod. "I'll hold you to that," I replied, each word laced with warning. He flicked his cigarette, shrugged, and sauntered back inside. And in that moment, my resolve hardened. I wouldn't blow the truth open tonight, not yet. But I would be ready. Because I knew, sooner or later, he would slip again. And when he did, I would be there, not just as a witness, but as the reckoning he didn't see coming. In the days that followed the wedding, I couldn't shake the image of my granddaughter's frightened eyes. Her words replayed in my head at night, echoing louder than the music that had filled that reception hall. I knew better than to confront my daughter immediately. Love, when it blinds, refuses to see even the clearest evidence. If I stormed in with accusations, she'd defend him, not herself. So I chose patience. And proof. I started by revisiting the cafe she mentioned. I asked the manager, a man I'd known casually for years, if he remembered seeing my son-in-law there. He frowned, rubbed his chin, and nodded. Sure, a couple times. Not with your daughter, though. Different woman. Dark hair, younger. They sat in the back booth. Thought they were just co-workers at first, but, he trailed off, shaking his head. Didn't look like business meetings to me. That was one thread. Another came from my granddaughter's phone. With her quiet permission, I scrolled through her messages. There it was, a single text she'd received late one night, deleted by morning but preserved as a screenshot. Remember, not a word. This is between us. No name, no number saved. But the time-stamp matched the night she told me she'd seen him. And then there was the neighbor across from my daughter's new townhouse. A sharp-eyed retiree who liked to sit on her porch with a glass of sweet tea. When I asked casually if she'd noticed anything unusual, she leaned forward and lowered her voice. That man has visitors when your daughter's not home. Same woman more than once. I didn't want to stir trouble, but if you're asking. 3 threads. Enough to start a rope. Each night, I wrote down what I'd learned in a small notebook. I wasn't rushing toward confrontation. No, what I was building was more deliberate, more devastating. I wasn't just protecting my daughter anymore. I was preparing to make sure, when the truth came out, there would be no room for denial. And as I closed the notebook on the 5th night, I whispered to myself, he thinks he's clever. Let him. Every liar leaves a trail. And I'll be the one to follow it. It didn't take long for him to stumble. Men like that never last, too much arrogance, too much hunger. They believe themselves invisible until the world catches them in the act. One evening, my daughter called me, her voice unusually strained. Dad, could you pick up Lily from practice? Mark said he's tied up at work. I agreed, though I already doubted the excuse. Work doesn't usually leave lipstick on your collar. When I pulled up to the school, my granddaughter climbed into the truck, her backpack bouncing against the seat. She hesitated before buckling in. Grandpa. I saw him again. Not at school. By the parking lot. He wasn't alone. I gripped the wheel tighter. You're sure? She nodded. He didn't see me. But it was the same woman. That night, instead of heading home, I drove past the office building where he supposedly worked late. The lot was half empty, most lights dark, except for a single corner office. And there, through the glass, I saw him, leaning too close to a woman, her laughter sharp even from behind the glass. His hand brushed her arm in a way no coworker would tolerate. I didn't confront him then. No. Confrontation without timing is wasted fury. Instead, I pulled out my phone and snapped the pictures I needed. Grainy, yes, but clear enough, him, her, the intimacy written all over their posture. The next morning, I paid another visit to the cafe. The manager slid me a folded slip of paper with a knowing look. They come here often, he murmured. This is the name on his tab. The name matched the one I'd overheard at the townhouse neighbor's porch. The rope I'd been weaving grew thicker. And still, my daughter looked at him with eyes that believed every smile, every excuse. She spoke of their honeymoon plans, of their new life together. Her happiness felt like glass, fragile, brilliant, and one wrong move from shattering. I watched, I waited, I gathered. Each lie he told became another thread in my hands. Because when his mask finally slipped in front of her, I intended to make sure it shattered so completely, he'd never wear it again. The notebook on my desk was no longer thin. Each page held a date, a time, a detail. Witness statements from the neighbor. Notes from the cafe manager. Screenshots from Lily's phone. Photos I'd taken through the office window. Piece by piece, the picture grew clearer, until there was no doubt left, my daughter had married a liar. But evidence without timing is like a blade left in its sheath. You have to know when to draw it. One Friday evening, I followed him again. My daughter thought he was working late, preparing reports for a new client. Instead, he pulled into a dimly lit restaurant on the far edge of town, the kind of place where no one asks questions. I parked a few cars away, my hat pulled low, my phone steady in my hand. He walked in with the same woman. They didn't sit across from each other, they sat side by side, shoulders brushing, laughter spilling too easily between them. At one point, his hand rested on her knee. I caught the moment in a photo that left no room for excuses. The next day, I visited an old friend from my time on the force, now a private investigator. I slid the notebook across his desk. I need this compiled into something airtight, I said. He flipped through the pages, his brow lifting as he skimmed the entries. You've done most of my job for me, he said with a wry smile. All right. I'll clean it up, cross-check the dates, add anything public I can dig up. When you decide to drop this hammer, it'll hit hard. When I left his office, I felt the weight shift. For weeks, I'd been carrying anger like a stone in my chest. But now, that stone had become a weapon, sharpened, deliberate, undeniable. That evening, my daughter invited me for dinner. She was glowing again, speaking of weekend plans, her eyes full of hope. And all I could think was how fragile that glow was, how false the foundation beneath her joy had become. My granddaughter caught my gaze across the table. She knew. She remembered what she'd seen, what she'd told me. And in her young eyes, I saw the same question burning in my mind, when? Soon, I promised silently. Very soon. The day finally came when silence felt like betrayal. My daughter invited the family over for a Sunday dinner, her voice cheerful on the phone. She wanted to show off the new house, the wedding gifts, the fresh start she believed she had built. I drove there with the dossier tucked in a leather folder on the passenger seat. Photos, notes, receipts, screenshots, all laid out in order, each page a nail in the coffin of his deception. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my chest burned. Tonight wasn't about anger. Tonight was about truth. The house smelled of roast chicken and fresh bread. Laughter filled the rooms, relatives chattering while my granddaughter hovered near me, her eyes searching mine for answers. She knew something was coming. Children feel storms before the first drop of rain. The groom played the role flawlessly, pouring wine, telling jokes, kissing my daughter's cheek as if his devotion were pure. Watching him act made my stomach twist. I thought of the photos of him with that woman, the way he touched her like he belonged to her, not to the wife at his side. When dinner ended, I asked to speak privately. The room quieted. My daughter blinked at me, surprised, but nodded. I gestured toward the living room, folder in hand. She sat beside him on the couch, still holding his hand. I'm going to show you something, I said evenly, and once you see it, there's no going back. But you deserve to know the truth. Her husband shifted uncomfortably, his smile faltering. What's this about? I laid the folder on the coffee table and opened it. The first page, his photo with the woman at the cafe. Her eyes widened, her grip on his hand loosening. The next page, screenshots of texts. Then, the photo from the office window. Finally, the restaurant shot, his hand on her knee. The room was silent except for the sound of her breathing, ragged and shallow. He reached for the papers, but I placed my hand firmly on them. "Don't," I said. My voice was steel. My daughter's eyes filled with tears. "Is this true?" she whispered. He stammered, his face draining of color. It's not what it looks like." But it was exactly what it looked like. And for the first time since the wedding, the mask he wore began to crumble. The silence after his stammer was heavier than stone. My daughter sat frozen, her hands trembling on her lap, eyes darting from the photos to his face. I could almost hear the shattering inside her, the collapse of trust, the ruin of vows spoken only weeks before. He tried to recover, reaching for her hand. "Listen, it was a mistake. A stupid, meaningless mistake. It didn't mean anything." But she pulled away, recoiling as though his touch burned. "A mistake?" she hissed, her voice breaking. "This wasn't once. These are different nights, different places. You lied to me. You made our daughter keep your secret." At that, my granddaughter stepped closer, her chin lifted with courage beyond her years. "I told Grandpa because I couldn't hold it anymore. I didn't want you to marry him." Her voice wavered, but her words struck harder than any evidence I'd gathered. He stood, his mask gone, anger spilling through the cracks. "You've been spying on me. Both of you. This is an ambush." I rose slowly, my frame casting a shadow between him and my daughter. "No," I said, my tone steady and cold. "This is the truth catching up to you. Don't call it spying when it's your own actions that betrayed you." For a long moment, no one moved. The weight of the lies, the years of charm and deception, hung in the air like smoke after a fire. Finally, my daughter stood, her knees shaking, but her voice clear. "Get out." He blinked, stunned. "What?" "Get out of this house. Out of my life. Out of her life." She pointed toward their daughter, whose eyes glistened with tears. "You don't deserve us." He sputtered, tried to argue, but the fight drained quickly when he realized no one in the room was on his side. Even the relatives who had lingered nearby had heard enough. Their eyes, once filled with admiration for him, were now cold and sharp with judgment. He left that night with nothing but the clothes on his back, his protests fading into the dark. The door shut behind him, the echo sealing his exile. And for the first time since the wedding, the house felt honest. Painful, yes. Shattered, absolutely. But honest. The house was quiet after he left. My daughter stood in the doorway, staring at the closed door as if she couldn't quite believe it had happened. Her hands shook, her breath uneven, but there was something in her eyes, clarity. The fog had lifted. My granddaughter slipped her small hand into her mother's, her voice steady. "I told you because I wanted to protect you." Tears finally spilled down my daughter's cheeks. She knelt, pulling her daughter into a tight embrace. "I should have listened sooner," she whispered. "I should have seen it." I stood back, watching them, a storm of emotions churning inside me. Anger at the man who had deceived her. Pain for the heartbreak she was now facing. But above all, pride for my granddaughter's courage, for the strength that had forced the truth into the light. The weeks that followed weren't easy. Divorce papers were filed, gossip swirled through the town, and some relatives muttered that the wedding had been cursed from the start. My daughter carried the weight of shame at first, embarrassed at how blind she'd been. But I reminded her again and again, the shame wasn't hers to carry. It belonged to the liar who had worn a mask until it cracked. She leaned on me more than she ever had before. Dinners together became routine, laughter returning slowly in stolen moments. My granddaughter grew lighter too, her smile no longer shadowed by secrets. As for him, he vanished from our lives. Rumors said he tried to patch things up with the woman he'd cheated with, but it fizzled. His reputation was ruined, his charm exposed for the hollow trick it was. He became a ghost, spoken of only in whispers, never with respect. One evening, months later, my daughter sat across from me at my kitchen table. She reached for my hand. "Dad," she said softly, "if it weren't for you, and for her, I might still be living a lie." I squeezed her hand gently. The truth always shows itself. It was just a matter of when. She nodded, her eyes steady now. And in that moment, I knew she wasn't broken. She was free. The wedding had ended in betrayal, yes. But from its ashes, something stronger had risen, trust between a father, a daughter, and a granddaughter who refused to let lies define their family. And that, in the end, was the only vow that truly mattered.